thing I like about it is that we've been very strategic about with whom we ask to speak. We usually choose someone that can talk about what's really cutting edge in the industry, or what's, as Philadelphia has been doing a lot of changes. Philadelphia is branding itself as the IT hub of the East Coast. So we try to invite individuals who can speak to that. As many of you know, BDPA was founded in 1975, so we're going to be 39 years old this year, which y'all should clap, that's phenomenal. And I spoke to Mr. Pace and I said, you know, we really need to be focusing on our 40th anniversary and what we're going to do and how we're going to continue to brand ourselves and how we're going to continue to address the digital divide. And we also, in looking forward, wanted to take the time to look and see what we have accomplished. So I thought there was no one better to talk about the state of the chapter than the founder, the first president of the BDPA Philadelphia chapter, to outline to us what BDPA has done and where we're going. So without further ado, because I know you're all here to see Mr. Pace, you see me every month, I would invite Mr. Pace to come up to say a few words.
All right.
I think I'm already mic'd up, so and I've got my cheat cards just in case I have a senior moment and lose track of where I am. But before I do anything, I'm not a big proponent of birthdays. I tend to ignore my own whenever possible. But today is the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King. And I think we should at least acknowledge that. I've got my Dr. Martin Luther King cufflinks on, okay? All right. And I did not want the day to pass without that at least being mentioned into your ear so that you could give some thoughts to the accomplishments of Dr. Martin Luther King, and particularly his efforts with respect to economic parity, which is key to me, okay? Now, Eileen mentioned the things that she figured she had talked to me about. Well, I'm not talking about any of that. Okay? I do want to address, when she asked me, I did tell her, I said, look, and I passed it by my wife, and she corrected it, and I ended up with a question asking you, is BDPA a promise unfulfilled? A promise is something that is put out and there is an expectation that there will be delivery from that promise. And we did that about 39 years ago here in Philadelphia, and I think it is probably fair to talk to the Philadelphia chapter about what has happened and where they are 39 years later, right? I'm going to do something that I don't normally do, and that is to talk a little bit about myself. And the reason that I want to talk a little bit about myself is because there's a part of my history, you know, and I accept the fact that other than the fact that I have snow on the mountaintop, that I am part of BDPA history. And to some degree, as an African American, part of the information technology history. You know, not to blow my horn, but BDPA was recognized through the admission of myself into the CompTIA Hall of Fame, along with Bill Gates and Jobs and some other people. Okay? And I make no mistake about it when I tell people that the organization thanks you very much, because not for one moment did I think Earl Pace had achieved something so significant that he should be admitted into the Hall of Fame, the IT Hall of Fame. But it was BDPA and its accomplishments that I rode in on, okay? And you guys have been wonderful for that. I had a little idea back in 1975, and you guys have made it into something significant, so I thank you for that. But I happen to be fortunate in the early years of my career. All right. Like many people during that period, I had no intention or no interest or knowledge really about then data processing or information technology. Okay. I graduated from college with a degree in business with an emphasis in personnel and labor relations. And my intent was to go to law school and to become a labor arbitrator. I got an interview at the Pennsylvania Railroad, and in that year, affirmative action was very big. And they told me that there was no positions available in the labor relations side. We're better to practice labor relations than the railroad, okay? I later found out that they had their person in labor relations, and it happened to be my daughter's godfather, okay? So they had their African-American person in there. So they asked me, well, would you like to take this test for a new department that we're forming called the computer programming side, excuse me. Welcome, welcome. So I said sure, because it paid a little more than the labor relations position anyway. And here I was a married man with a child. So I took that, and they say I passed it, okay? Hopefully my career indicates that I truly did pass it, but one never knows in that time, okay? I may have satisfied a larger need. Bottom line is I then got into a training program within the Pennsylvania Railroad that taught me how to program in something called SPS, and then the IBM 360 came out, and I learned assembler language, and I became one of the, quote, computer hotshots at the Pennsylvania Railroad. After 2 years, I wanted to see what I was worth, so I went out looking, testing the market, which of course we all should do. And I found a small financial services firm that was just starting. And it was going to be developing one of the first online real-time processing systems for banks, credit unions in the country. And I was hired. I was one of 4 people that was hired for that job. Didn't know banking. You know, I'm looking for personnel and labor relations. So it was 4 of us who started it, and during the day we would try to develop the system, and at night the bankers would come down and teach us banking. So we were developing a system and learning the industry at the same time, okay? Bottom line is I was pretty fortunate, and I moved from that programming position into a programming manager position, into a vice president's position, and after about 6 years, I was still pretty young. I'm 6 years out of college. Well, actually 8, because I stayed at the Pennsylvania Railroad for 2 years. So I'm about 8 years out of college, and at that point I have what was probably the equivalent of a CIO position, and I had just barely turned 30. And the reason for it is that there was a demand for the skills that I had. And myself and one other fellow were direct reports to the board of directors, which was comprised of the banks and credit unions that had formed this company. We were processing about 50, 60 banks on the East Coast between New Jersey and Virginia. When I started, there was 4 of us. 3 who were not African American, and me. When I moved into the programming manager's position and then into the vice president's position, we then had about 200 technical employees. And I was involved in hiring many of them. And I recall being at a presentation where the board of directors was receiving a new version of our software. And one of the board members came up to me and said, "Is online service going to become the United Nations, Earl?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Look at what you've hired. I said, well, if you want me to, I will, but what I've been doing is hiring people based upon ability rather than who they are or what they look like. He walked off in a huff, okay? And what that said to me is that if we can increase the upward mobility of minorities, and particularly African Americans, in this industry to the point that they are in hiring positions and secure enough to make those hiring positions, make those hirings based upon ability, and if necessary, give somebody the benefit of the doubt if they're not quite there and there's a choice between the two. The kinds of decisions that have been made in the industry for years, okay? We should do that. And that's one of the reasons, in addition to the fact that, of coming in from another conference where it was 200 or so technology people, and just like in your security issue, it was 199 other folk and me. I came back and David Wimberly, who had been in the hallway every time I went to the men's room, asked me to form a professional organization. This time I came back and I told him yes. Okay? And that's how BDPA came into existence. Now, why did we come into existence? Can you go to the next one? These are the very original objectives of Black Data Processing Associates. I know they're the original ones because I went into some of the files that I have in my office and I pulled out a handwritten copy by Brenda Cummins, who none of you probably know, who had taken the chicken scratch, and I think all of you know what that is too, that Ralph Gordon did while we were creating these bylaws, and she transposed them into a readable document. So I pulled them off, and this is the exact words that were on there. Now, if you look at that, it says, accumulate a pool of data processing knowledge.